Hi, my name is Felice Belle. As Robbie said, I'm part of Narrative 4, a global nonprofit using the power of stories, art, and education to equip young people to become powerful forces of change. I'll be moderating tonight's conversation with Andres J. Molina, Hala Alyan, and Brian Lindstrom. We are broadcasting on Crowdcast, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. The chat is open for comments, and PEN America staff will be answering your questions in the chat throughout the event. They'll also be sharing information about the participants. If you have questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please enter your questions there, and we'll get to them in the Q&A portion of the program. This event will be live captioned. Please see links in the chat for access. And we will provide periodic visual descriptions for folks in our audience with low vision. Right now, we are in a frame on the left side of the screen. We see PEN branding, PEN America branding, and the PEN World Voices Festival logo in the corner. There's also a chat with lots of comments on the side where people are telling us where they're watching from. So let's get started with tonight's event. I am so excited and honored to introduce the panel to you. We have Jay Molina, Hala Alyan, and Brian Lindstrom, who will be discussing the intersection of art and social justice, the need for new narratives, and how we can transform our feelings of anger and empathy into action. Jay Molina is a poet and co-director of the forthcoming documentary, Fire Through Dry Grass, which chronicles the pandemic experiences of the Open Doors Reality Poets, a collective of Black and Brown writers, artists, and disability rights activists. Brian Lindstrom is an award-winning documentarian and filmmaker whose work covers a wide range of social issues, from stigmas against menstruation faced by women and young girls to police accountability and mental health. And Hala Alyan is a novelist, poet, and clinical psychologist. Her latest novel, The Arsonist City, is a sweeping family saga that explores issues of identity and home alongside the legacy of war in the Middle East. I will now ask each panelist to share their pronouns and a brief description of themselves. For example, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Black woman with black rimmed glasses and short curly hair, and I'm wearing a short sleeve navy blue dress. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay. If you can just tell us your pronouns and give us your visual description, and then we'll go to Hala and Brian.
Yeah, my pronoun is he, him. I'm a 43-year-old Spanish man raised in the Dominican Republic of dark brown skin tone. Right now I'm bald-headed, but when I had hair, it was black. I'm a real big sneakerhead. I'm wearing a red V-neck t-shirt with my favorite Nike SBs, the notebooks. They are black and white with a pattern like all composition notebooks. I'm at the Reality Poet Clubhouse right now, here at Color. In the background is our Reality Poets mural on a white brick wall. In the closet to my left, there is all of our equipment that we use for our projects.
Thank you, Jay. Hala.
Hi, my name is Hala Alyan. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Arab American woman with long, dark hair, wearing a black t-shirt, and I am in my bedroom. And behind me is a bed, blue wall, and some plants.
Thank you, Hala. And Brian.
Hello, I'm Brian Lindstrom. I'm a cisgendered white male. I have brownish gray hair with probably more gray than brown. I'm wearing a pink shirt and a blue blazer, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm coming to you from beautiful Portland, Oregon, in the attic of my house.
Thank you, Brian. So I could say a lot about each of our panelists, but I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves to you in their own words and share a little bit of their art with you, just by way of introduction. So we're going to start with Jay. He's going to tell us about himself, show a short film clip, and then we'll move to Hala and Brian.
Yes, I am an open doors reality poet. I am also a director, motion graphics artist, and animator. At first I was introduced to poetry through open doors and their workshops, but was encouraged to explore more artistic ways to express myself later. Since my youth, I was curious about how animations were made, so I went into that. Over the years, my art has allowed me to be more open with myself and others, and helped me talk about things that are currently happening around me. In the middle of the pandemic, a patient from Elmhurst Hospital was brought into the bed right next to me, and he was positive for COVID-19. I called the administration, and they assured me that that patient wasn't positive. A few weeks later, he was transferred to another hospital where he passed away from the virus. I have underlying conditions, so if I would have got the virus, I probably would have been dead right now. That led me to think everyone's lives in this nursing home were in danger. So I began a quest to make fire to dry grass to show people what was happening here because no one really knew what was going on. I hope through the documentary this kind of treatment never happens again to nursing home residents in the future. Welcome to Colin Max Prison, run by people who lack any vision, people who put me in danger, treating me like I was a stranger. I'm sitting here with my heart filled with anger because of the wrong decisions they're making, like keeping us in these units locked up with patients that have the virus. Couldn't they put them one flight up? Why keep them beside us?
Can't go nowhere. I told you they come to the door like we in prison. Look at the bag of stuff. Like we just came from commissary.
When did I get convicted? Why they keep us restricted? But their minds must be twisted. If they think for 1 second, we will make a big effort to tell the world this sad story, while they bathe themselves in their own glory.
Thank you. That was an excerpt from Jay's forthcoming documentary, Fire Through Dry Grass. Now we'll have Hala Alyan introduce herself and share a piece of her work.
Hi. So my name is Hala. I'm a Palestinian Syrian American clinical psychologist and writer. I have authored a couple of novels and a few collections of poetry. And my clinical work involves a fair amount of trauma work. I do a lot of work within immigrant communities. I do therapy in English and in Arabic, and so I do work with immigrants, children of immigrants, all of that good stuff. I'm going to read a poem called Self-Portrait as My Mother. When the warplanes come, I pluck them from the blue sky like Tic Tacs. The cupboard is always full of honey and needles, Merlot and Marlboros. The rumor of America around my neck, it tightens. On the third day of the month, I bleed a pond. Toss a dun into its mouth, I am the dun. The chamber empties into a Feiruz song. Take the color of the trees with you. California is my safe word. Oh bird, oh wink of a car on a highway. I know a nation by its germs, its endangered water. I know the desert as an unborn son, and every night I claim him. His black hair is spiky as a cactus. Give me a fate and I'll lose it. Give me a border and I'll run it crooked as a love line on a bride's palm. I sing. I mop the floors. I can't kill for enough clean. At the Bronx, I buy mirrors and clocks, lavender seeds, bird feeders, fill my house with the belongings of dead white men. My breasts rise. I read the drugstore horoscopes. My moon is in Sagittarius. Sun is in Acta. Heaven's an empty sky. Borders open. There's nothing on the other side, and isn't that God enough? Thanks.
Thank you, Hala. Narrative 4, we do a lot of snapping, so thank you so much for sharing that poem. And our last panelist, Brian Lindstrom, is going to introduce himself and a clip of his work.
Well, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm fascinated by stories and how they can share people's voices, and I'm particularly drawn to what happens when people change the story they tell themselves about themselves, because I feel like that's when true change happens. Most of my films focus on people that society puts an X through in one way or another. And a great example of that is my film Mothering Inside, which is about inmate moms at the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility outside of Portland, Oregon. And, I love this theme, power to the people. while making the film Mothering Inside, the Department of Corrections decided to close the program my film was profiling called the Family Preservation Project. And so an earlier version of the film was used to fight that, and actually was instrumental in helping the Oregon legislature pass a funding mechanism that allowed the program to continue. So I'm very happy about that. It was really a real honor to make this film. I feel like anytime as storytellers we're led into another person's life, that it's an incredible privilege, and I'm just so grateful for the women, the children, and the families that you'll see in this little clip from Mothering Inside. So thank you.
I felt I had failed her so much that any contact with me would be more pain for her. I thought she was better off without me.
I have this thing of wanting to be bottled up and not wanting to let anybody in or know anything about me, and that was something I had to let go. That means opening up and sharing stuff like this.
Somehow you just steered down the wrong path, but I don't think it's intentional. Nobody intentionally wants to screw up their life.
I want to be somebody that my son looks at and he's like, my mom went through some really bad stuff, but look at her. I want to be that person that is the success story.
We've made our mistakes, and we are trying to move forward in life. I don't think society realizes that when they send a mother to prison, they send the entire family.
You know, when those children come, you see your hope again. You see your life again.
Now that she's seen that I'm here and I love her, it's so funny because she looks to me for more things now.
I love you, Mom.
I love you too, buddy.
Thank you, Brian, for that excerpt from Mothering Inside. So now we're going to come together as a group and have a conversation. Then we'll open it up for the audience Q&A. So everyone on the screen is a storyteller, tells stories in multiple forms on multiple platforms. I'm curious how you decide what stories you want to tell. In particular, when we're thinking about the intersection of art and social justice, do you feel like you have a responsibility as an artist to address certain issues? What leads you into telling a story?
Well, actually, when I started writing poetry, I would only write poems about certain situations and issues that were going into my life. And then I realized that those issues and situations were probably common with other disabled people. And then I decided to put them out there in a visual format so the whole world or the whole country could see it. And that's how I started with the Fight to Dry Grass film, because it felt to me that I needed to let the whole country knows what was going on in nursing homes, during the pandemic.
Can I just say that that kind of urgency just pulses all the way through Jay's film. And it's such a powerful piece because of that.
I totally echo what Jay is saying in terms of, I think we tell our stories out of necessity a lot of times, and I'm the daughter of Palestinian and Syrian immigrants who sought refuge in this country after the Kuwait invasion by Saddam. And I write about immigration, and I write about displacement, I write about occupation. And I think that I've just been reminded in the past 12 days with everything that's happening in Palestine and the Free Palestine movement, just how, one of the more touching things that's happened over the last couple of weeks is speaking with Palestinians across occupied territories in Gaza, all over, who have said, what we want is not your donations, we need your voices. We need you to tell these stories. We need you to amplify these stories. And so it really sort of cemented what I've long thought of as a privilege that I have as somebody in this country with this passport who can speak English without an accent, who can be digestible to folks in this country who may not know very much about that region and the occupation, that I think if you have a platform and you have access and you have audience, it's not just your responsibility to tell stories that matter to you. It's your responsibility to amplify the stories of people that don't have that access and don't have that audience. And it's not something to be taken lightly.
And for me, it's just that feeling, that inner barometer we all have that tells you, oh, you have to do this. And, oftentimes I'm at the mercy of something like the Department of Corrections, like, will they give me access? So there are different parameters and limitations I have to work within, but, it's almost always following that inner voice that says, literally, if you don't tell this story, no one else will.
I noticed just in the work that was shared at the top of the event that there seems to be a through line between all three of you, a tension between incarceration, whether it's literal or metaphoric, and your own agency and freedom. So I'm wondering how you navigate that in your life as a storyteller, and how you navigate that when you're sharing other people's stories.
Well, for me, I was actually in jail before I fell on the wheelchair. And I had like a rough time when I was in jail. But then, when I came to this nursing home and the whole pandemic hit us, it was like being back in jail. Actually, it was like a jail within a jail. And we wasn't getting no information on what was going on or where it was going to stop. So a lot of us felt isolated, and we felt kind of like that we didn't have nobody around to help us through these times. But through my open doors family members, the reality poets, they made it so each one of us will have a support group to talk about. So we started doing Zoom events twice a week. We would all come together and express our feelings and support each other.
Well, for me, making Mothering Inside, the women in the program get to see their kids for 3 hours every other Saturday. And it was just such a powerful and a privileged experience to be filming these intense interactions where all of that, maternal love is trying to be expressed in a little, 3-hour window. And then knowing that at the end of that day, I get to go back home and be with my kids. And I think so much of storytelling is, trying to bridge those gaps and kind of ask the bigger questions of like, why aren't these women able to be freely with their children the way I am with mine? And wouldn't our resources be better spent, instead of incarcerating these women and adding more trauma to these families, putting resources in before arrest would happen that can, engender healing?
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully said from both of you. I mean, I think the way that I think of it is, and I really do mean this, that we are not free until we're all free. Like our freedom is illusory until everybody is liberated. And I think that being mindful, I think there's a way to hold that dialectical tension where you're like aware of that, not so overwhelmed by it that you cannot like be in the world and make things, and also to find a way to like use your voice, your access, your agency to be of service to, and that, I mean, to me, to be of service to communities, to be of service to people, to be of service to the stories that, like we were saying, Brian, earlier, the stories that are sort of burning inside you to come out, like to be of service to the things that matter and have value. And I remember, so I've done some work in forensic settings as a clinician and as a writer, and that combined with the feeling of, I think, survivor's guilt that a lot of people in diasporic communities have, of sort of like, really just our parents made very random choices that led them to take like a right instead of a left. And that's why I'm in Williamsburg right now, and I'm not in Gaza. My dad was born in Gaza. Like it's really sort of like, look at the draw. And I think being that I really resonate with that experience that you're talking about. It's like you step out of the correctional facility and you're like, oh, I can like I remember the first time I started working in those spaces being like, oh, I can just like open doors in my house, like being able to open and close like a bedroom door, or close the door in a bathroom, or decide that I want water right now, so I'm going to get water right now. I think that sort of mindfulness of what it means to have certain freedoms is really only useful in as far as we are aware of it and we put it towards something of value.
I love that point that you brought up, that none of us is free until we're all free. I think depending on who you are, where you live, your level of privilege, you get to say, I'm fine, without taking into consideration anyone else. I think as artists, you are all engaged on a daily basis with people who have a myriad of stories. I'm wondering, when someone engages with your work, do you have a dream about how they might respond after they've received the work? Knowing that it's out of your control, right? Knowing that people will interpret it the way they want, critique it the way they want. But is there some action that you want people to take after they've encountered your film or your poem or your writing?
I can think of one experience I had. I made a film called Finding Normal, which was about long-term heroin and crack addicts kind of rebuilding their lives with the help of clean and sober housing and a recovery mentor. And I'll never forget, at one of our first screenings, a county commissioner was in the audience, and she came up to one of the participants after the film and said, you know, I never realized before that addiction is a disease that tells you that using the drug will help you, when in fact it doesn't. And that might sound like a small thing, but just the fact that she had that kind of epiphany, I think really changed the way she thought of the issue, and it actually changed her vote, and she decided to fund the program. And I think stories can touch people in all kinds of ways that make them really kind of re-examine some of the assumptions that they make. And when they do that, the world kind of gets smaller and richer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, I think there's two things that are lovely when they happen. So if someone reads a book of mine and is like, oh, that like opened my worldview or opened my perspective to communities, to situations, to oppression that I hadn't been aware of, and it kind of piques my interest to learn more, like that's really, I mean, that's always like such a wonderful feeling. And the feeling that I think is even more wonderful is when people within my community or communities that are similar to mine read it and go, oh, I saw myself in that, or oh, there was representation in that, and that was reflected back to me. So I think this like my hope, my fantasy is for like the work that I produce in the world to be a place for folks to see themselves in, and also if they don't see themselves in it, for them to kind of non-defensively be like, oh, there's something here that is unfamiliar and is new, and like to still want to engage in it, and to like, you know what I mean, to like to kind of come from a place of like questioning and curiosity. I think that's all most artists' dreams, is like to have their work engaged with curiosity, and like I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, my whole life changed completely when I started using the wheelchair. Like, it's like my life didn't have no future. I was a troublemaker, but then once I got on the wheelchair, I joined Open Doors and became a reality poet. My whole life changed. I was able to find myself and things that I wanted to do. And then, you know, during that, I realized that usually people that belong to the disabled community, they be treated like second-hand citizens. And then, you know, we took it upon ourselves to be the voice of those people, to talk about how we are being treated, and that we don't want to be treated like that anymore, and that we want to be acknowledged for our skills and what we accomplish as disabled people.
That reminds me of, there's a psychologist, Dan McAdams, who talks about this concept of narrative identity, which is essentially how the story that you tell about your own life becomes your life, right? Like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I feel like culturally speaking, in America specifically, we tell the same stories over and over again. And so I'm always excited to hear stories that I haven't heard before. And I feel like each of you is doing that in interesting ways. I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about the stories that you've chosen to tell and why.
So I can go first. I've chosen to tell stories of displacement, of oppression, of diaspora, of connection, of families. I in some ways, I mean, we're not going to get into a debate about free will here, but in some ways, I feel like that, like, I don't know how much that was a choice. Like, in like, those have been the circumstances of my life, and those have been sort of the things that have been percolating in me since I was 4 when we fled the invasion of Saddam's invasion. That's like been such a salient part of my life for so long, for as long as I've been online, so to speak. I think in some ways I've been writing the books I've been writing my whole life, and then it just happens that they come into certain moments and I put them on the page. But I really love this idea of, I mean, we are the stories we tell. And I think that actually that's both a promise and like a warning. Like you are the story you tell over and over again. And that can be like a really beautiful thing, but it can also be something to, it can be dangerous. I think getting too attached to our narratives can be just as problematic as not having narratives.
I think I'm attracted to stories.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think I'm attracted to stories where the people I'm profiling in the film are going through a process that allows them to change that story they tell themselves about themselves. Because I feel like that's when change really happens. And I can't think of a better example in my films than in Mothering Inside. There's this great program the Family Preservation Project does called a Geneogram. And what it is each woman makes a visual map of their life. And it's like a key, and like, mental illness is a certain color and pattern, addiction, abuse, all these kind of big, life forces. And then they kind of plot out their lives using this visual cue. And what it does is help them realize that it's not like they're bad people. It's like they're a person who has, a family history of incarceration and poverty and racism and, rape and, all these violent things, and it's like a train leading to the prison, And once they realize that, then it's not like, oh, I'm a bad person. It's like, no, I'm a person who has these challenges. And because of this trauma, I made these choices that landed me here. And to see them go through that process it's like the shame kind of evaporates and is replaced with empowerment. And now just fast forwarding the women that were in that film, they become these powerful advocates, and they made Oregon the first state in the union to pass a Bill of Rights for the children of incarcerated parents.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for me, I am a disabled man. So now I belong to a new community that I wasn't part of before. So because of that, I like to, write poems and make stories about disability rights and about social justice, because I feel that our disabled community is being treated very differently than the regular people.
So at Narrative 4, when we use the term story exchange, it's a methodology where you're paired with a partner. Your partner shares a defining story from their life with you. You share a story with your partner, and then you come back together as a group and share each other's story in the first person as if it was your own. And again, I feel like in different ways, you're all bringing other people's stories to the forefront. But I'm wondering, and Brian, you kind of did this already, but if you have another story, you're welcome to share. I'm wondering if there is a story or a work of art that was formative for you, that you carry with you always, that is informing your work as some sort of North Star or guiding light.
Can I start? When I was in 8th grade, I had this great teacher, Mr. Greenfield, and it was the last class before Christmas break. And so he said, okay, class, I want everyone to write down everything they want for Christmas. And so we're all like scribbling away all these like, toys and record albums and things we want. And then he said, okay, I'm going to show you a film. And he showed us this incredible 14-minute film called A Day in the Life of Bonnie Consuelo. And it was all about this Florida housewife and mother. And it's just profiles her going through her day. She gets her kids breakfast, takes them to school, goes shopping, makes a meal, takes one of the kids to the doctor's. Nothing like revelatory happens, except that Bonnie has no arms, and she's doing all of this with her legs and feet. Mm-hmm. And then after the film ends, Mr. Greenfield turned on the lights and said, now who wants to share their Christmas list? And no one would say a word. And I was like, wow, film is a powerful medium. I want to be part of that. I want to use that.
Wow. That's some effective education. I think for me, it's like, I come back to my grandmother like religiously, and she passed away a few years ago, and she kind of left before that because she had Alzheimer's. So for about a decade before that, she was sort of losing her memory, and when she lost her memory, it was sort of like she lost Syria, and then the family lost it. Like it was sort of this interesting, like watching a lineage be erased, like sort of in front of you, because with her went all these stories, and so I go back to her as the source of storytelling, both in terms of the stories that she did tell and in terms of the ones that I thought to ask about too late. So I think there's a lot of, I feel like I engage with her a lot when I'm writing and have these imaginary conversations with her a lot in my writing. And a lot of my writing is sort of filling in the gaps of what sadly is her silence at this point when I ask those questions. And then sort of I ask these questions and then a part of me tries to answer them for her. So I feel like that's like something, it's like a well that I keep returning to.
Well, for me, when I used to live in the Dominican Republic, I was a baseball star. A lot of people thought that I probably was going to make it to the major leagues. I was part of the Dominican Republic national team, and I always used to be playing in front of a lot of people, and they would be chanting my name when I go to bat. But then I had a personal conversation with my father, and he said to me, I don't know if it's baseball, but you are destined for something big in this world. And I was chasing through all that through my teen years and 20s. And now I'm happy that I finally found it, which is becoming a poet and becoming a filmmaker.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's a good segue, because I would love to talk about this last year, right? I feel like it's been traumatic for us all in different ways. I'm wondering, I know, Jay, you actually made art out of the moment, right? Your film.
Yes.
But I'm wondering for the entire panel, if you could speak to how the pandemic affected your artistic process. I had a friend who was like editing everything and feel like nothing mattered because of the dire strait. Sort of, we all felt like we were in collectively in different ways. So I'm just wondering if there was any noticeable effect for you in this last year, in your artistic process and the stories that you choose to tell, with the urgency with which you tell them, that type of thing.
So for me, I was working on a third novel that I stopped working on the week that the lockdown started in New York, and have yet to go back to it. And instead have spent the last year working on nonfiction. There was something about the pandemic, and there was something about the urgency and the unavoidable present momentness of the pandemic that made imagination really hard for me to access. That's not to say nonfiction doesn't have a creative element to it, but it made conjuring the whole world and envisioning characters that didn't exist. It made it really hard to do. And at the same time, I think this is true for a lot of us that weren't essential work. Some people's work amped up and they became more busy. But for me and for a lot of folks, we just had more time to be in our heads, which for me, not the best place to spend the time. a lot of time in my head. Like I can be very obsessive. I can be very, like, it just wasn't like the best. But what came from it is there was a lot of stuff came to the surface that I think had been subconscious. And I realized that I sort of had like all of this material to work with, and I didn't have to find a fiction, like a novel or a short story or a poem to fit it into. I could just like say it. So I think the urgency of the moment translated into this urgency of like actually just like telling the truth without too many filters applied onto it. So yeah, so I did I kind of switched genres for the past year.
For me, I love to make cinema verite films, which is just a fancy way of saying being a fly on the wall and following people, through a process. And that was kind of taken away from me for a while. So I switched directions and just focused on editing a completely different kind of film, which is a documentary about the late singer-songwriter Judy Sill. And it's been kind of a nice, just different kind of filmmaking muscles to use and explore. But it's made me think a lot about like future films I might want to make. And, where I am in now, Portland, Oregon, it's just been really hard hit by what's gone on in the last year in terms of like kind of our civic conversation or lack thereof, and how the downtown has been impacted by that. And it just really makes me think I'd like to explore making a film that maybe shows the importance of people coming together, and and what it means to have a vital downtown and how important that is, because I feel like it's endangered right now. Portland is kind of boarded up, and a lot of people are afraid to go downtown.
Yeah, for me, I was locked up in my unit for months at a time. So I started, feeling bored. So what I did was like, I taught myself how to use After Effects. And that's how I became an animator.
And Jay, can you tell us a little bit more about Fire Through Dry Grass? Because I know part of that is actually capturing on camera the experience that you had at Kohler.
Yeah, I strapped myself with a GoPro camera on my chair, and I started going around the whole facility and filming everything that was going on. People on the hallways, when they used to let us come out to the yard to get some fresh air, I would have conversations with the reality poets. And some of them we couldn't use, but most of them we used for the documentary.
Awesome. So we're going to open it up shortly for questions from the audience. But before we do that, I just want to ask the panelists, do you guys want to ask each other, or do you all want to ask each other anything before we turn to the audience Q&A?
Jay, I would just like to ask you a quick question. Where are you at in your film? And it's such an amazing piece of filmmaking. How can people help at this point?
Well, we are in the editing process right now. We have made a few rough cuts already, but we're still working on them. And just follow us on our website, firetodrygrass.com.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, and Brian, I want to see one of your films.
I'll send you a link.
Please, yeah.
So we have one question from the audience. If you have questions, now's your time. Get them in that Q&A. Vivian Nixon asks, do you think COVID has made people in the USA more aware of how ineffective captivity and isolation are? Might that change the stories Americans tell themselves about the need for policing in prisons? How can we as storytellers facilitate that awareness? So that's a 3-part question, but it's in your chat, so you should be able to see it. I mean, I'll just start by saying I'm not on the panelist, but I feel like one thing COVID did was just expose every failing system we had, right? Policing, racism, like everything kind of crumbled. And to me, I mean, it was awful to experience it, but to me, sort of the blessing of that moment was the realization that these systems that were designed to serve people don't. And we are actually the ones, right, that are going to serve each other and save ourselves, not these systems that never served us to begin with.
And to add to that, like there were alternatives this whole time. When things started to threaten like economy, like, you know, this idea that like if I just think of like friends of mine with children where like if their kid is sick and they have to stay at home, pre-pandemic it was like that's just a day off, like you have to take that personal day, that's going to be a strike against you, that's going to be whatever. And then it turned out that we can do a lot of stuff remotely, that like have to, like there were solutions that were found that I think were kind of like there all along. I think about also like poetry events and book events where like the degree to which that increased accessibility for folks, for the people who might have found it difficult to attend things in person, and also people who are in places where they would not be able to attend in person. It's like it's this idea of accessibility and actually like bringing ease into people's lives was like always an option. And there's, I think it sort of speaks volumes that like that was there, but it took a pandemic for us to actually be able to access those resources.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that we are going to be talking about this pandemic for a few years to come. And, you know, the last part of the question, how can we as storytellers facilitate the awareness? Is, you know, we need to keep talking about what we experience. So then that way the people in charge could, you know, write that down and realize, you know, if this ever happens again, hopefully it doesn't, what they should do, you know, to keep us all sane and to keep us all in between, the situation.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has brutally exposed all the fissures, in our so-called safety net. And I think more than ever, people like from even kind of like more conservative type people realize just how unfair, our system is. And I think there's a huge appetite now for stories that really expose that.
I'm curious, within each of your art forms, there are typically constraints, right? I'm thinking specifically about poetry when you're writing in form, right? It might feel really liberating to write a sonnet, or it might feel like there's no way I'm going to make this meter. Do you feel encouraged by the constraints of your form, constricted by them? How does that play into your creative process?
I find that form is helpful when the subject matter for me feels really fraught and chaotic. It provides me with a container. But that if it's something that's more processed, or that I feel like I kind of have a handle on the content matter a little bit more, then I can find it a little bit oppressive or a little bit like smothering. So it depends on my relationship with the thing that I'm trying to make. Sometimes it can be comforting. Sometimes, I mean, I like a little bit of structure. And sometimes it can be exactly what I need to feel like I know, like, it can just, there's something about it that can feel cozy, but it can also feel smothering depending on the headspace.
Yeah, well, for me, with the poetry, I never felt constrained. I always felt open, that I was able to talk about my feelings and the things that were going on around me at the time. So I never felt like there was somebody telling me, don't say this. Or don't do that. Actually, I felt like the world was open to me to just talk about stuff.
I sometimes feel constrained in just the access I might get to a story. Like if there's a prison institution involved or things like that. But almost always, I find that that the story rewards persistence, and that somehow those constraints will reveal kind of powerful moments that otherwise I might not have even been around for.
I used to feel like I could only be honest in poems, like I couldn't be honest in real life, but I could do it on the page. I don't feel like that now. I've grown up a little bit. But there was something about what was just said that made me think of this Brecht quote. you can't write poems about the woods. You can't write poems about the trees when the woods are full of policemen. And so, Hala, you talked a little bit about this earlier, feeling like you're not sure how much choice you had in your subject matter, right? You kind of felt compelled to tell certain stories. I'm wondering, if the woods weren't full of policemen, if you could write poems about the trees, what would you be writing about? So if you didn't have to, if you weren't compelled, I know this is this group, right? Like, we want righteous justice, but like, if you could just write about anything you want without the pressure of feeling like you had to speak to an issue.
What a beautiful question. No, it's a brilliant question. I mean, I think that the whole world would open up. I think, I mean, I would write about my dog and like how her tail thumps when I walk into a room. Like, I mean, like I would, like, there would be like I would be able to, I think my like, even when you asked it, I felt my shoulders sort of go down. Like, I think they were like this, and I felt like there's just like, I think I would be able to be in the world and write about the world in a more expansive way without feeling like I'm wasting time if I'm not, you know, also attending to these other larger issues, which I mean, unfortunately is how I feel a lot of the time. And that's not to say that I don't want to be writing about the things that I do, but to your point, if those things were, if Palestine were liberated, if I, you know, if my family had, you know, and people like me had the right to kind of go wherever they wanted, and like everyone was feeling, if there was liberation for all, like we were saying earlier in the conversation, like, I think I would write more about nature. Mm-hmm. I think I would write a lot more about nature. Yeah, about the land, because then the land wouldn't be so fraught with so many things. Yeah.
Anyone else want to take that one, Brian or Jay? You don't have to. We have some more audience. Oh, Brian.
Well, so, you know, sometimes I've had the experience of making a film and then having to tell people, I wish I didn't have to make this film, not because it wasn't a privilege and a powerful experience to make the film, but I wish that the injustice that necessitated the film didn't exist. So, but I like the idea of like doing something with nature and just kind of focusing on beauty. That sounds very appealing to me too.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. Actually, I wish that I never had to tell the story about the isolation and the pandemic here. But, you know, it happened. So, you know, I felt that I have to tell the story.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a few more questions from the audience. Margaret Larea asks, how do we hold on to the necessary reflective stance that the pandemic created? And I'm reminded by that question of being in New York post 9/11, and people are like, we can never go back. And then like a couple of years later, we kind of just all went back, right? And I think there's a fear of that happening now too. So any advice for us to hold on to this moment where we're thinking about each other and considering each other in new ways?
I mean, I think that like the powers that be in a lot of these systems are like real hungry to get back to status quo. So I think just like keep paying attention. Like, I don't think we're going to forget, you know what I mean? Like, I think if these issues and the things that came to light during the pandemic matter to you, it's always easier for things to go back to the status quo than to change. That's always going to be like, things are always going to move in the direction of inertia if you let them. So I think it would just be a matter of like remaining attentive and remaining curious.
And reminding ourselves what Hala said earlier, like, you know, none of us are free till all of us are free, you know?
Yeah, you know, I want people to realize that this pandemic changed our lives, either for better or worse. It changed our lives and made us find another source, like another way of living. Because the way that I'm living my life now is not the way that I used to live before the pandemic.
Jay, can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think, again, each of us, I keep talking about the old world or pre-pandemic. Can you tell me who you were before and who you are now? What changed?
Well, before I was more into, kind of like just regular things like going out, buying clothes and stuff like that, buying sneakers. But after the pandemic, I realized that it's like a bigger war. We are all a community, and we all have to help each other.
Mhm. Awesome. Anyone else want to share their pandemic change?
I mean, everything has changed. The world feels sort of unrecognizable in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just remember. I think there's a lot of good. Like there was a lot of horrible things that happened in the past year. There was a lot of suffering. There was a lot of death. There was a lot of loss. A lot of violence, and there were a lot of moments of people coming together and lifting each other up and showing up. And I think remembering that as much as like honoring the tragedies that happened, I think that's really important.
Awesome.
I don't have anything more kind of profound or cliche to say than just the sacredness of life and the preciousness of it, and we've seen what happens when that's not honored. And it seems like it's a call to arms, to create a better world.
I mean, I can be super introverted. I used to say I hate people, like just as a shorthand for that. And being isolated in the pandemic, I realized, I love people, right? And what matters most to me are the people that I love, right? Like those relationships are everything, and everything beyond that is kind of secondary, right? Like I just want to hold on tighter to everything that I love. All right, so we're going to have one more question for the audience, and then Hala, we're going to ask you to share another piece as we close out. So Rue Freeman asks, each of you is an artist who is also doing other kinds of work. Can you speak to how you each live your art and or your beliefs?
Well, for me, actually, the fact that I do poetry and I work on films is like a wish come true. It's like something that I never thought I was going to do in my life. So actually, I'm living through my dreams right now.
That's amazing.
For me, it's like what Jay said about the sneakers. It's a bigger world, and just trying to remind myself of that.
Yeah, I think I've been trying to live my beliefs through like in different spaces. So thinking about like what decolonization looks like in therapy spaces. I mean, psychotherapy is something that was created by and for white, generally middle class or upper middle class folks. And like, there's a lot of conversations now around what does it mean to decolonize a therapeutic space? What does it mean to decolonize? I teach at a university level. So like, what does it mean to decolonize a classroom? What does it mean to decolonize a syllabus? What does it mean like to actually think about, like, there's a lot of words that are like sort of like kind of sexy and hashtaggy right now, but like to actually think about like, what would that mean to put that into effect and to really challenge those things that are no longer serving those spaces, and to really be bringing like a mindful social justice element into all the, whether I'm having a conversation with a friend or a family member and they say something problematic, how do I like engage with that, and how do I educate, and how do I show up for people, whether someone's watching me or not. So I think thinking about like how I bring that worldview into different spaces is like one of the ways I'm trying to kind of hold myself accountable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think I kind of feel like Jay, where I lucked out, I get to do what I love as part of my actual job, right? Which is to be in conversation with people from around the world, and just the act of sitting and the deep listening to somebody else's story. Like, I love that. It's actually also one of the things I missed in the pandemic, was sitting around tables and telling stories, right? Like, it's one of my favorite things in the world, and we get to do it in this format, and it's a great substitute for being able to be in a room with you. So we're almost to the end of our program, but before we go, we want to hear from each of our artists again. So each artist is going to, if you want, you can make a little closing remark, share a piece of work, and we'll start with Hala and then go to Brian and then to Jay.
This is to read a little piece.
To share, if you want to share another poem, but also if you have any final thoughts you want to offer to the audience, one thing you want us to remember.
I mean, keep paying attention. I think I would say just like keep paying attention to the things that are happening around us. I think that's going to be really crucial. And I think that's going to be the best way to bring everything that we've learned in the past year moving forward into a post-pandemic world. And thank you so much for having me also. I feel like I didn't say that. It was an honor to be on a panel with such amazing folks. I'm going to close out with a poem. Okay. When they say pledge allegiance, I say, my country is a ghost, a mouth trying to say sorry and it comes out all smoke, all citizen and bullet and seed. My country is a machine, a spell of bad weather, a feather lacing my mother's black hair. I mean her dyed hair, I mean her blonde hair, I mean her hair matches my country, so shiny and borrowed and painted over. My country is a number, like it is 1948 and my great-grandmother flattens bread with her hands while my other great-great-grandmother prays with her hands. One watches her land disappear, the other builds a house on land that will disappear. My country is an airport line, a year of highways, an intermission. My country is Stockholm Syndrome, is immigrant mouth saying thank you, saying please, saying my country is no country but ghost, is no man but ghost. My country is dead. My country is named the dead. My country is a mouth trying to say pledge and it comes out all salt. My country is a mouth and nobody can pronounce my name. I mean, my country forgets my name. I mean, my country is always asking for my name, and I'm always saying it twice, spelling it like an address. My country is a number, like it is 1967 and every Arab leader is crying on television. Every mother is clutching the son she has left, and my great-grandmother names my mother nostalgia while my great-grandfather shows my father a gun. My country is all ghost. My grandmother is all ghost. My grandmother is a country. I mean, my grandmother is my country. I mean, my country is a lie, is an emptied house, is 1,000 cardboard boxes. My country is remember when we left Akka? I mean, Gaza. I mean, Homs. My country is a number, like it is 1990. My mother is crossing a border. I mean, desert. I mean, life. I am at her heels. I'm paying attention. I'm praying to a flag. I mean, I'm learning English. I mean, I'm forgetting Arabic. Or it is 2006 and my grandparents won't evacuate, won't leave another war, and all summer I dream of floods, collect bullets and love the wrong person. Or it is 2003 and I am in Beirut watching Baghdad burn because of America. I mean, I am in my country watching my country burn because of my country. Or it is 2016 and some saw it coming. Or it is 2020 and the women in Beirut are at sea. I mean, my country looks beautiful in red. I mean, I look beautiful in red. I mean, this country likes me in red. Or it is every year and my country is taken. My country is stolen lands. I mean, all my countries are stolen lands. I mean, sometimes I am on the wrong side of the stealing. My country is an opening. I mean, bloom. I mean, bloom not like flower, but bloom like explosion. My country is a teacher. I mean, do you want to see my passport? I mean, do you like my accents? I mean, I stole them. I mean, I stole them. I mean, where do you think I learned that from? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hala Alyan. Brian Lindstrom, what would you like us to remember before we watch your next clip?
Well, Hala, that blew me away. Thank you. What I would like you to remember is I'm about to show a little clip from a film I made called Like a Shield that's all about inmate moms and their children advocating for the Bill of Rights for children of incarcerated parents. And I'm just showing a small excerpt from it, but at the end of the film, it's not in the clip you'll see, but each of the kids, some who are as young as 10, were completely motivated about wanting to make sure that no other kid that came behind them would have to go through what they went through. And I just want us all to take that kind of selfless courage and big heart into this new post-pandemic world. And I thank everyone for this great experience. Thanks.
The hardest part of my dad being in prison was not getting to see him at all. I got calls, but I didn't see him at all because his prison was way too far away.
All they wanted to do was see me. to touch me, to kiss me, to love me, to hug me, and they craved to have their mom. And every visit was a huge reassurance that I do love you and you do matter. And they did better in school every time they saw me. Kids need their parents.
Because hugging and holding hands or something, it gives you more joy in your heart, and makes you feel happy about yourself and who's with you and around you. It makes you feel safe, makes you feel like she's just right there with you and you'll never get hurt, like you're untouched. Like a shield.
I have the right to support as I face my parents' incarceration.
The support looks like consistent care from adults, reassurance that it's not their fault, that they are still loved, that life is still okay.
They go through it every day of that incarceration with me because they're missing the most vital, important part of growing up, and that's having mom and dad around.
Whoever is involved in that child's life, being supportive and encouraging.
I have the right not to be judged, blamed, or labeled.
I feel different because my friends would ask me, "Where's your mom?" and I would just say they're somewhere in Portland with my other friends, my friends' moms, because I just didn't want to tell them.
I was in 6th grade, so at the time I felt like it was maybe my fault or something, like her going to jail reflecting on me.
I've been in and out of foster care and been all over the place since she hasn't been in my life. Just hurt, pain, just a lot. I don't know. Something I'm still trying to figure out.
The main important thing was I didn't want her to live in shame. I didn't want her to be embarrassed for the decisions that I made. I mean, it's bad enough what I did, but for it to continue on and create this ripple, I wanted to get rid of that as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing that excerpt from Like a Shield. I think it's really powerful that the young people in that film walked away feeling like they didn't want anyone to feel like they had felt, knowing that they had that power. I think adults could learn a lot from that. And Jay, we're going to ask you to tell us what you would like us to remember and introduce your last clip.
Sure. I've been a comic book fan for years. I like both Marvel and DC comics. I also like Japanese manga. One thing about that captured my mind is even though the comics are our imaginary world and setting, I felt that reality poets were superheroes because we didn't let our disabilities affect how we change the world. And that's why I wrote the poem Hero and animated it just to show that we are like real heroes. I want the disabled people to feel special, not that they are second-hand citizens, that we have been treated for so long, that we have the same rights as the normal community, and that we should be recognized and acknowledged for our accomplishments. I believe that together is how we get there, and we can let people know about a situation and let them hear us.
Some superheroes are born with special abilities. Few are turned by tragic events. Others are shaped by possibilities. But we were turned into heroes by our disabilities. After hitting rock bottom and almost dying, we understood it was get rich or die trying. but rich with knowledge instead of rich with money. Rich with desire to help other people. Telling them about the mistakes we made that led to us being crippled. We have come so far since our tragedies, far from being just one of many casualties. We put on a cape and a cowl, just like the DC hero, the Night Owl. We have shown others that this wheelchair is not the end, that instead is the beginning of our new lives. Lives that now have a meaning. Lives that are sincerely willing to keep working with our youth until our last days, or until our debt to society is finally paid.
Thank you so much, Jay, for that clip. Thank you for writing your story, rewriting it as a superhero. I want to thank all of our panelists, Jay Molina, Hala Alyan, Brian Lindstrom. It has been incredible to be in conversation with the three of you this evening. And thank you to our audience for joining us. The Penn World Voices Festival isn't over, so please visit penn.org/festival to hear more from your favorite authors. And please follow these authors, share their work, get to know them online. Thank you for coming and have a great night.
Thank you.